Hey, welcome back to Pattern Explainer. Today, why your body still thinks it should be walking. 9 other kinds of human being have existed on this planet. All of them are dead. You are watching this video because a chain of accidents didn't happen to your ancestors, and did happen to everyone else's. If you could travel back 50,000 years, you'd find a planet where several different kinds of humans existed at the same time. Some looked a lot like us. Others were built completely differently, shaped by climates and landscapes that would break a modern person. One species lived on a remote island and evolved to be barely 3 feet tall. Another is so mysterious that nearly everything we know about them comes from a single finger bone. And then there was us, Homo sapiens. Today, we are the only human species left. Not because we were the strongest or the smartest, or the ones who'd been here longest. Just the ones who are still here. Which raises a question that doesn't have a clean answer. What happened to everyone else? To understand that, start with the species that lasted the longest. Homo erectus. Homo erectus showed up around 2 million years ago. Everything modern humans have ever accomplished fits inside the last few thousand years by comparison. Their bodies were the first to look recognizably human. Long legs, shorter arms, a frame built for walking and running over open ground. They were almost certainly the first human species to leave Africa, meaning they figured out how to survive in environments they'd never evolved for. Their brains were smaller than ours, but their stone tools barely changed over hundreds of thousands of years. That sounds like a lack of imagination. It's actually the opposite. What they made worked, so, well, there was no pressure to improve it. But by their final chapter, the world had left them behind. Their last populations ended up on the island of Java, cut off from the mainland. No way to reach other groups. No new territory to move into. The forests they hunted in started shrinking. And without enough people or space to recover, a species that survived for close to 2 million years slowly ran out of options. Their last fossils date to around 110,000 years ago. After outlasting everything the planet had thrown at them, Homo erectus was gone. Now, the Neanderthals, probably the most misunderstood species in human history. For decades, they were written off as dim, brutish cavemen. That image was always wrong. Their bodies were compact and powerful. Wide chests, thick bones, strong arms, heavy brow ridges, and large noses that warmed cold air before it reached their lungs. Their brains were on average slightly bigger than ours. They hunted large, dangerous animals at close range, which is why their skeletons show injury patterns similar to modern rodeo riders. They controlled fire, made sophisticated tools, and buried their dead with care. Neanderthals lived across Europe and Western Asia for more than 300,000 years. But around 45,000 years ago, Homo sapiens began moving into the same regions. For a few thousand years, both species lived side by side, and DNA evidence shows they even had children together. But living alongside Homo sapiens created new challenges. Both species hunted the same animals and relied on the same land. Homo sapiens lived in larger groups with wider social networks, sharing resources and knowledge over greater distances. Neanderthals generally lived in smaller, more isolated groups, making it harder to recover from difficult times. At the same time, the climate kept changing, cold periods and warm periods reshaping the environment. Neanderthal populations became smaller and more isolated. Their DNA shows very low genetic diversity. Their numbers were already declining. By around 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals disappeared from the fossil record. They weren't wiped out by a single event. A combination of competition, climate change, and shrinking populations gradually pushed them toward extinction. Now, the Denisovans, they were different from every other species on this list because we can barely see them. The entire discovery began with a single finger bone pulled from a cave in the Altai Mountains of Siberia. A fragment so small it could sit in the palm of your hand. When scientists extracted DNA from it, the results didn't match any known human species. Not Neanderthals, not Homo sapiens, something else entirely. Since then, Only a handful of additional remains have turned up. Some teeth, a piece of jawbone found high on the Tibetan plateau, and not much else. And yet their genetic shadow is enormous. Denisovan ancestry shows up in modern populations across Asia and Oceania. Some Melanesian groups carry as much as 6% Denisovan DNA. Tibetans inherited a Denisovan gene called EPS1 that lets them function at extreme altitudes where most people's bodies would start to fail. A species we can barely find in the ground is still shaping how living humans survive in thin air. But as a living population, the Denisovans faded out somewhere around 30,000 years ago. Their range may have been vast, but their numbers were likely thin. Now, one of the strangest chapters in human history. In 2003, on the Indonesian island of Flores, researchers discovered a human species unlike anything seen before. They stood only about a meter tall and had brains roughly the size of a grapefruit. At first, many scientists were skeptical. Some argued the bones belonged to modern humans with a disorder, but the evidence pointed to a completely separate species. This tiny human lived on Flores alongside Komodo dragons, giant storks, and dwarf elephants. Islands often drive evolution in unusual directions. Large animals may become smaller, while small animals grow larger. Their fossils date from about 100,000 to 60,000 years ago, and stone tools suggest they may have survived until around 50,000 years ago. What's interesting is that modern humans were arriving in the region at roughly the same time, on a small island. A species doesn't need a massive catastrophe to disappear. So why are we the only human species left? The obvious answer is intelligence, but that falls apart quickly. Neanderthals were intelligent. Denisovans adapted to extreme environments. Homo erectus outlasted us many times over. Homo floresiensis survived conditions that would terrify a modern person. What may have actually separated us was something harder to measure: the way we built connections across distance. Homo sapiens didn't just live in groups. We built networks. When one group faced a crisis, the knowledge they'd learned didn't die with them. When the climate shifted and entire regions became unlivable, our species had the flexibility to reorganize because we weren't locked into any single place or strategy. But even that only explains part of it. Luck, geography, and being in the right place with enough numbers at the right moment all played a part too. You didn't win some evolutionary contest. Homo erectus outlasted you by a factor of 20 and still vanished. The only real difference between you and the 8 species now in the ground is that the accidents that erased them haven't reached you yet. Being the last one standing isn't the same as being safe.